So we have a small but perfectly formed panel today made up of Karen Hamilton, who is of course a partner in the planning team here at Brodie's, and we're joined today by Robbie Calvert. Robbie is a policy, practice and research officer for RTPI Scotland. He is a chartered town planner with a passion for all things planning and social policy. He's certainly kept busy in his current role, leading on consultation responses, and he's authored a number of research reports and policy briefings, some of which we may touch on today. And he sits on a wide range of working groups and forums. He also does have a background in local government planning, having previously worked in development management for the Cairngorms National Park Authority. So lots and lots to talk about. Today we are going to be having a chat around the various initiatives that RTPI Scotland are running, including bits on resources, funding, workforce and skills, and we'll talk about the Future Planners project as well, perhaps with a little bit of a rural focus today. So with that, I'm going to pass you over to Karen and Robbie to kick things off.
Okay, thanks, Kendra, and hi, Robbie. Great to have you with us today. So I feel quite exhausted listening to all the things that you're responsible for and that you're doing in your current role, and it's obviously been a very busy time just generally for you over the last year or so. But I think you also manage the Young Planners Network as well. Sadly, I think I don't qualify for that anymore, but it's a busy time for the young planners as well, just coming up, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got the Young Planners Conference on the 12th of May, so that's going to be in Perth. So I'd also like to say a big thank you to Brodie's for being the legal sponsor. And I believe you'll be attending that anyway, doing one of our workshops.
Yes, I think Neil and I are doing a workshop there, so looking forward to that one.
Very much looking forward to that. So yeah, so that's a busy time. And yeah, other than what was covered off in the intro there, other duties, I edit the Scottish Planner magazine, which we published last week. So that's a really interesting edition on local government and planning. I also look after the policy subcommittee, and yeah, a lot of stakeholder engagement involved with my role. So that's working with either our sister institutes or our members.
Okay, so and Kendra mentioned, Robbie, that you spent a year and a half, I think, with Cairngorms National Park Authority before moving back to the RTPI. And working for a park authority involves, I suppose, a number of special considerations, including, obviously, we have the aims, the statutory aims of the park. But I think people would be interested to hear a bit more about that and just how that experience perhaps differs from working in a local authority development management role. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you found that, and just what are the particular challenges for officers within a park authority.
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons why I actually moved up north in the first place is that sort of classic statistic that 95% of Scotland's land mass is rural, and it contains a quarter of the population. So I thought professionally and personally, it was an experience that I really needed to gain and understand rural areas and some of the issues that are there. And the Park Authority was the perfect place really to start for me. I think there's a number of challenges there, not necessarily strictly in the Park Authority, but as you can imagine, a severe lack of affordable housing, and that's very much driven by the high demands of people to live in that area. But also high rates of second homes and holiday lets, and actually a lot of the existing housing stock in the Cairngorms being above the sort of national average in terms of size, so not necessarily suitable for everyone. Yeah. So getting that much needed development through in a manner that was sympathetic to what is a really highly environmentally sensitive area was challenging. And there's some particularly unique ecological sort of considerations and planning concerns up there. For example, capercaillies,
yes, indeed.
which you know has been known as the bird that says no to development in the Cairngorms, but a very sensitive species and can get affected by human activity. So that required quite stringent planning considerations. But I also learned a lot about upland land use and management concerns as well. So whether that's hill tracts, forestry, and the likes. And I'm sure we're all aware that the tourism this area receives is quite significant. Certainly around Aviemore and Lochmorlick, and certainly around the summer as well. That's very much the honeypot of the Cairngorms. So a lot of applications I was dealing with there were managing the visitor numbers there in terms of providing the infrastructure they required. But it was quite interesting at the park, so liaising with visitor services and very much a push to have visitors visit other parts of the national park at other times of the year as well, and kind of spread out the visitors.
The burden,
yeah.
The burden, but the benefit, because
Exactly.
I suppose it is both of those things, and certainly recognise a number of those issues that you mentioned from my own sort of experience of Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park Authority, and a number of the issues that they face. And of course, just the sheer sort of scale of ground to cover as well, I think, is a challenge for all rural authorities, but I guess in some ways maybe leads to, innovation in terms of how officers are having to handle things. And recalling that sure Highland Council, for example, were making use of a lot of the sort of electronic visual aids for committees and things, as opposed to site visits before we were ever into the realms of COVID. And it's just the sheer practicalities of what members and officers might otherwise have to be dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a resource burden that local authorities in rural areas really have to deal with. I mean, for example, in the Cairngorms, if our enforcement officer was to make a visit to the Angus Glens, that would be an entire day of driving. So you can imagine the resource pressure there in terms of staff time. So yeah, I think there was definitely an incentive to innovate there. And COVID, as I was working there when COVID first started, that certainly sped things up as well. But even the use of Google Maps here or there just to save you potentially for a site visit was something you would look to do in the first instance, for sure.
I suppose, but sticking with park authorities, they're perhaps sometimes unfairly, I think we would say, criticised or there's a perception of them being anti-development, perhaps. And we know that the aim of conserving and enhancing the natural heritage of the park is going to trump the other statutory aims if they come into conflict. But how do officers or how do park authorities go about trying to ensure that nonetheless they're still promoting the social and economic development that's needed at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something, I absolutely agree. I think the accusation of national parks being anti-development is somewhat unfounded, and certainly from my experience, I mean, the CMPA planning department I worked in had a very strong customer service sort of focus with applicants, and we worked really hard to get developments approved. And actually within the National Park Organisation itself, I think the planning service was very much a proponent of sort of developing and celebrating the settlements that were in the park as well. So I think to some extent an ally to applicants there. But for me, I think the critical stage there was through pre-application discussions and if possible with all stakeholders out on site and then around the table, and that includes internal experts, and really that would be about setting out the key ecological considerations from the start, and with the aim to sort of shape proposals from the off and somewhat smooth the consenting process and then get the right development in the right place. And with that, achieve these social and economic outcomes that we want to see. But I think it's also worth noting that development in itself is not necessarily something that we have to trade off with biodiversity value. And actually often schemes that come through with, for example, like strong landscaping and a lot of tree planting could actually enhance the biodiversity in areas if they were, for example, replacing semi-improved pasture land. So there's definitely worth looking at from that angle. But I think having joined the CMPA after a number of years of it being established, I think you could really see this approach paying off in terms of considerations to ecological matters from the development industry, sort of operating in the area, and very much a culture of understanding these issues from the off as well. So not too much conflict in those regards in my experience, really. But I think very much helped by the resource that we had in-house as well. So, you know, ecologists at hand, but also landscape officers and outdoor access teams as well and whatnot. So,
and I'm sure many local authorities, particularly in current times, which we'll perhaps come on to, but would envy those in-house specialisms across some of those areas. I mean, even just thinking of perhaps landscape officers who perhaps in the past were more of a regular feature across the board, but for some of the authorities grappling with sort of, you know, complex large-scale wind farms and the like, who simply don't have that resource to turn to these days, it's perhaps an envious position to be in from that perspective. So having had that experience then, Robbie, there's obviously been an ongoing debate about the expansion of the sort of national park project, and I know it was one of the issues that was picked up in the planner recently. Would you support the further expansion of national parks?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's quite difficult, and it really depends on which ones and where they're proposed. I'm aware of 7 candidate areas, but I mean, we could really extend that to 9 if we were to include Skye and Assynt as well, which are both would be reasonable candidates in my eyes too. And I think each area proposed has got a unique context and unique considerations. So that's in terms of geographic, locational stuff, you know, socioeconomic issues and ecological perspectives as well. And I think a lot of this depends on the resource available. I think this certainly comes into light with the recent publication in Nature, which was highlighting, I think there was this week in the news, highlighting that the designation alone is not necessarily halting the decline of biodiversity of species, and they require specific interventions and management, and that needs resource. And I think as well, establishing a new planning service, you know, would be costly if that were to be the case. And but I think, you know, if that was going to be new resources coming into the planning system, I think we would welcome that. So it's a really interesting debate as well over what the new planning service would look like. I know there's a difference between Loch Lomond, for example, and the CMPA. So in the Cairngorms, for example, we were calling authority. So, you know, I never dealt with any householders. It was only larger, significant applications. And the purpose in the Cairngorms was, as it sat across 5 different authorities, it was very much established to manage areas, a landscape in a coherent manner, which was very much at the periphery within their jurisdictions of their local authorities. Now, looking at the 7 candidate areas, none of them are sitting across local authority boundaries, as far as I'm aware. Could be wrong. So I'm not quite sure what shape they would look like. I assume more like Loch Lomond and Trossachs in the CMPA, and it would have delegated powers as well. But just one other thing to add about maybe the benefits of national parks, in my opinion, was the structure of the board sitting on the planning committees. Because this would be a mix of elected members, but also individuals appointed by Scottish ministers and nominated by the councils. And within that, there was a great range of expertise here. And bear in mind, every application I processed, I had to take to committee. But the expertise was just drawn from such a wide range of disciplines, from tourism, natural heritage, farming, outdoor access. I think for me, that really worked in terms of improving the decision-making process at such a crucial part.
It's certainly a real strength of that sort of governance or sort of constitution makeup, isn't it? Yes, and it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned it's certainly a challenge, I think, for the authorities where the number of underlying local authorities sort of within the park area. I mean, that can be a challenge just from the perspective of data collection and some of these issues that the authorities have to grapple with. But well, I suppose it's a wait and see on that one. Yeah. When I was thinking about it, I was wondering as well whether even the statutory aims might change over time, perhaps to reflect other issues, thinking of climate change and matters of that nature. But perhaps that's one for another day. So anyway, what should we talk about now? I think you've been a bit of a rural champion just over recent times, perhaps off the back of that, Robbie, having had that experience, or whether, as you were saying to me, maybe you were pushed towards that by Craig, being a truly urban guy. But anyway, in the recent work that you've done, and we had your think piece last year in the run up to NPF4 being published on rural planning, with a view to sort of stimulating debate at that point. And you talked about the need for flexibility in policy making and application to take account of rural contexts, and spoke about the need for bespoke policies. But do you think we've still got some way to go then in terms of hitting those aspirations?
I mean, I'll be brief in regarding NPF4. I think we've all probably heard enough about it, but yeah, I think a number of stakeholders, including ourselves, felt that there was probably a way to go there in terms of the rural policy section in NPF4. I don't think there was a huge amount of development from what was in Scottish planning policy. And I think we also shared some concerns with others that maybe some of the other policies within NPF4 weren't fully rural proofed or caveated effectively or fully enough to reflect the needs of rural locations. I think, having said that and thinking about flexibility, I was somewhat heartened by the further consideration given to rural matters within the draft local development plan guidance. And I think in a number of cases, we'd actually suggested that wording be moved from there through into the NPF4 just to give it a bit more primacy. But actually, there'd been a lot more sort of policy development going on in Scottish government than maybe people had noticed.
Yes, well, it was good to see that. I think the additional colour given to matters by, I think the guidance in particular. I think a lot of people were sort of heartened just across the board to see that, and perhaps giving a bit more confidence that the message was getting through, that it's not going to be a one size fits all policy. Particularly,
I guess considering the flexibility, though, I think it's really important that. Something we asked for in the response to the draft LDP guidance and regs was more information about how local development plans can deviate from the NPF4 and give us that critical flexibility, because I could imagine in rural places it's going to be the most important really to have that. And so we want more information there about how reporters would deal with that at examination, for example, just to give local authorities the confidence to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, and avoiding those sort of when the pushback may come, that there's a clear hook for authorities to be sort of hanging their hats on, as it were. So, I mean, do you think this all comes back to delivery of affordable housing at the end of the day in rural areas, or is that falling into the trap of looking at things too narrowly, as we often do?
I guess, I mean, delivering affordable housing in rural areas is not that easy, but if it only was that easy, I mean, I'd never want to understate the importance of providing rural affordable housing in rural areas. Relatively small developments can be transformational for the sustainability of rural communities, but affordable housing alone is not going to address the challenges facing rural communities. And I think the situation also does vary a lot across the country, going back to that theme of flexibility. I mean, I've been traveling a lot around rural Scotland as of late, and there's many places which I've visited which have very affordable housing, but they're still suffering from issues around depopulation.
Yeah.
And I think key to reversing this trend will also be things like revitalising village and town centres, improving the economic opportunities, through diversifying and sort of strengthening the rural economy. And there's lots of opportunities with that, especially with the sort of green industrial revolution that's about to come our way. But also things like, improving connectivity, and that's in terms of providing sustainable transport options, but also through improving broadband, and maybe looking at how we can better provide community services as well, including cultural offerings. And even if we can do more with higher education, sort of study opportunities to attract younger folk back or to rural Scotland, because fundamentally the place you want to live, affordable housing is one consideration, but it's it's part of a myriad of other
one of
considerations.
many. Yeah, and it was, funnily enough, I was at a Scottish Land and Estates event, a very good event yesterday, with quite a sort of cross section from that sector, and just talking about a lot of these same issues, Robbie, certainly infrastructure and sort of skills and resources, and just what needs to be done across the piece.
Can I just get in with a quick plug for
yeah, of
we're
course.
actually
please do
first plug or second plug of the day. We're about to publish a UK-wide piece of research on rural planning. So that's going to be looking at how planning can support rural communities, but sort of examining it through the lens of Brexit, COVID-19 and climate change as well, looking at the challenges and opportunities there. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That'll be published shortly.
Great. Well, everyone, you heard it here first. Keep an eye out for that. So, well, I think that takes us neatly into other initiatives that you might have on the go at the moment. So, could you tell us what's on the agenda for you all at the RTPI over the coming year? I know that the Future Planners project is something that we have been talking about, but I know that there's a lot more going on. So, we'd love to hear about some of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really busy first quarter for me. So a lot of things have been on pause and everything's been MPF4 and LDPs. But I think after taking a quick breath, I think we've got quite a few things underway. So, I mean, obviously we're looking for progress there on the MPF4, but there's many other parts of the Planning Act still to be implemented. Thinking about things like the Planning Improvement Coordinator, Chief Planning Officer guidance, regional spatial strategies. So we'll obviously look to be involved with that as much as we can. But obviously, well, it's a week now, isn't it? We've got the local government elections coming up. So yesterday we published our manifesto ahead of that. And this is really focused on sort of encouraging newly elected members to sort of champion planning services within local authorities. And that includes through encouraging the reinvestment of the recently increased planning fee income back into services. So really pushing the kind of resource agenda that we've been doing for many years now, but also through endorsing the chief planning officers as the kind of key kind of corporate component potentially within local authorities as well. So that can be found on our website.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, well, on the chief, all of these things are going to be, I think, incredibly interesting. It's and I know that as well you had I think piece earlier in the year on the sort of chief planner role, and just how that's going to pan out in terms of responsibilities and having the voice at the right level within local government. So
exactly, and it's quite a crucial relationship, I think, between the chief planner and the elected members as well. So really trying to hammer that home with that.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned,
it's absolutely the right message from your manifesto. With I mean, we know that elected members, they love to be involved in planning. They want a seat on the committee, and they're so interested in developments which are happening or not happening, or which they want to see happening, or perhaps may have strong views about in their communities. But they really need to be buying into it's the service behind it all that makes it all happen, and really sort of understand the need for that to be properly funded. So.
Absolutely, and it's I was saying to you just before we went online, but it's just the start of this kind of work for us. We're going to be looking to put out more material as elected members really take up seats there, and work with HOPS Improvement Service and other institutes there in terms of supporting newly elected members and training programs, and especially at a time of such great flux in the planning system as well. I think it's going to be ever.
Is there ever a time when we're not saying that, Robbie? I don't know.
No, the only thing constant is change. But yeah, as you mentioned, the Future Planners work, I think is a really interesting piece. That's going to get published very shortly, I think, in May anyway. We're expecting that, and that was really born out of work we'd done previously, especially about resourcing. I know at the time of the Planning Act achieving royal assent, I did a bit of work sort of trying to cost it to some degree, and there's quite some worryingly large figures there. So, additional workloads coming online, but then also work that Partners in Planning did alongside ECOS and Skills Development Scotland. And that was showing some issues there we have in terms of the workforce pipeline. So I think the work highlighted around 700 additional entrants needed in the next sort of 10 to 15 years, which
the numbers are
significant. So I think this work was really building on that. It's great if we get more resource into the system, but do we have the manpower to do that? And I know this is something a lot of industries are experiencing at the moment, but I don't think that stops us from putting together a plan about how to resolve it. And this, just having a flip through the draft report, there's some really interesting stuff already coming out of it. But actually, the situation at the moment is quite difficult in terms of recruitment for a lot of local planning authorities. Now, I don't know if that's related to the fee increase and that being reinvested, or it's that money coming into planning authorities, especially into development management teams. So there's a lot of hiring at the moment, but I think on average two vacancies per planning authority in Scotland at the moment. So we've got a lot of places to fill at the moment, let alone into the future.
Absolutely. And I mean, certainly, anecdotally, obviously people are always talking resources and about the numbers, but with older professionals perhaps leaving, and even with the new ones coming on, you end up with that sort of gap in experience somewhere in the middle for dealing with some of these trickier applications where the assigned officer perhaps is needing that senior input from someone further up the line who just is very busy, and it will take time. It will take time, even with new bodies sort of coming in to address all of that.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of succession planning to do there. I mean, the Skills Development Scotland research, I think it was 8% of local authorities are under 30, and then 35% are over 55. And so, in the coming 10 years, we're going to have a sort of mass retirement, and it's bringing those younger planners up to scratch, which will be difficult. And that, especially that sort of senior planner, that 10 years experience was very much in demand in the industry. And I imagine that's absolutely the same situation now.
So how do we get the message out then to it's about selling planning as it's the interesting career that kids want to get into? How are we getting that message out there?
Yeah, I think that's what this work is looking at in the first instance. So it's kind of scoping out the different routes that we have currently into the planning profession, their effectiveness and the outcomes. Looks at the impact of potentially introducing an apprenticeship, for example. But it looks at interventions already in place and how we can sort of improve the attractiveness of the careers. And I think a good starting place there is to look what's done in other professions and other professional organizations, for example, teachers, but there's been a lot of that recently, a lot of like advertising campaigns and whatnot. And yeah, I think, I mean, for me, it's personally with younger folk, I think, it starts at school. It starts at getting involved in high school, getting involved in the curriculum there, shaping and influencing that. I think we've got a huge opportunity to sell planning is very much a climate action career. And I think we can really mobilize, all the school climate strikes and that strong sentiment of the younger generation there. We can mobilize that and say, look, here's a career where you can have a direct impact on, the net zero agenda. So that would be my first thing I think we should do. But then after that, it's how do we get folk into universities? Obviously, exploring the apprenticeship, I think it's an important one. We're currently putting together a sort of case for that to Skills Development Scotland. Hopefully that could maybe broaden and diversify the profession a wee bit more as well.
Yeah, which it's again absolutely up there on the agenda to have that wider representation. I think from all areas of
absolutely
people across Scotland. And so, what about on the digital front then, Robbie, and the getting the system up to
Yeah,
to
so
scratch on the digital front?
that's another big sort of chunky piece of work that we're doing at the moment as well. And we've been doing for a number of years now. So working on behalf of Scottish Government there relating to their digital planning strategy, of course, and the programme there. And we've been very much looking at the kind of the skills and the capability side of this. So we've conducted the sort of phase 1 of that, doing some survey work there. And that showed a real sort of appetite, I think, for the greater use of digital technology with planners. I think as long as the business case is made clearly to local authority planning departments, and the digital tools and the systems and the applications can be demonstrably shown to improve the sort of planning process and practice. So I think real coalface kind of enhancements there. So not just digital for digital's sake, although I imagine, COVID's moved us on quite far in those regards anyway. But there'll still be some room, I believe, for sort of face-to-face things in planning. But I think we could certainly streamline and enhance the system and also improve it in terms of folk engaging with it as well. And more.
Well, to a certain extent, it's I mean, it keeps coming back to the resourcing question, doesn't it? But even with some of the tools that we have at the moment, I think certainly the quality of information on portals has definitely suffered, and clearly, understandably, during the last couple of years when it won't necessarily have been a priority to keep these things up to date. But in terms of sort of the transparency of the system and engaging with members of the public who are interested in these things, it's all very well having the systems, but they have to be used properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the next part of this work anyways is us putting together the kind of plan with the aim to develop the infrastructure required to support the delivery of a digital skills development program in the near future. And I think we were thinking that be a national one as well. So we can really upskill planners to move forward with this new digital planning system. I mean, Scottish Government has spent £35 million on it. So it's seen some really significant investment there, and hopefully we could achieve a lot of efficiencies and take some resource pressure off local authorities at the same time. So fingers crossed for that.
That would be very welcome. So maybe just pause at this point. Kendra, do you have any? You've been very politely not interrupting us as we've been chatting there.
No. I suppose I was just thinking about if one of those sort of classic dinner party questions, if you thought about your vision board or your mood board for the planning system in say 5 years, what are a couple of things that you would like to see for the Scottish planning system?
Goodness, well, I think I would start with a national planning framework that works for everyone, because that'll still be in place then. So I'd hope. I'd like to see one with maybe a lot more younger folk in it, and I think perhaps the future planners stuff there. But I think it's something that's really nice to see MSPs acknowledging, and they have done in several debates recently. I was given evidence at the Net Zero Committee there in terms of local government's role in achieving net zero, and that's something they highlighted there, and then it was brought up again at the parliamentary debate the other week there on the NPF4. So including planning as a STEM subject, for example, was suggested there, which I think is great. So I think with a new planning system, lots of fresh blood there, well resourced and digitally literate, shall we say, and up for the challenge. I think those would be my key desires of a planning system in 5 years from now.
I was going to ask you, Robbie, about your experience of giving evidence to the committee. How did you find that?
Yeah, I thought it was great, actually. Yes, I've done 2 evidence sessions already this year. I think Craig's doing another one on retail as well in the coming months. So it's quite busy actually for us in terms of sort of parliamentary engagement. But yeah, really nice to see the committee really getting a hold of some of these issues. I think we saw that with the local government committee's report on the NPF4. I think they really got a hold of some of our main issues anyway. So it was really nice to see them coming through. And nice to see that profile for planning, to get that at that sort of national level. Even having Nicola Sturgeon talking about planning, I thought was great. So yeah, I've been very pleased with that. So hopefully we can use this opportunity to continue to, champion planning across the country. And I think that's another thing that I really welcome in the Planning Act. There's a lot more there in terms of children and young folk, getting them involved with the planning system. And hopefully we can convert people into planners through that means. If not, just, improve the younger generation's ability to sort of engage with these kind of really key civic processes, such as planning. So hopefully we can sort of mobilize some of the momentum that we've had at the start of the year and keep that going and keep planning in the spotlight.
And when we were speaking before today's discussion, Robbie, we were keen to stay off of NPF4, as you said. Didn't want to go back into all of that when I think everyone sort of said their piece on it. But obviously we did have the letter from the various sort of organisations that were sort of calling for a pause on the proceedings to give a chance. Obviously, there's a concern that just having got to this stage and the number of issues that have been raised, is there going to be a sufficient time and enough of an opportunity to sort of scrutinise what comes out, in terms of the next stage before it is set in tablets of stone and it's all too late. I suppose people might be wondering, have you at the RTPI got any more insight into what a pause may or may not look like?
I wish I did, but Scottish Government colleagues are understandably being very tight-lipped on the matter. But I'd agree with that sentiment. It is a 10-year framework, so it's going to be in place for a long time. I'd rather we get it right. And we'll see. I mean, some policy areas I think I was broadly happy with. Some other ones we need more substantial rewrites or edits. And clearly there'll be a capacity issue there at Planning and Architecture Division to be able to undertake all that work, which is quite significant. But our door is always open. If there's any kind of, I think with Scottish Government, if they want to show us any amendments or whatnot, we'd be very happy to work with them, and I'm sure a lot of local authority planners would also say that too. So I think Scottish Government have been pretty open and inclusive with their sort of engagement process of the NPF throughout. So we ask that they continue that and that they truly reflect what's coming, and so yeah, time will tell.
The minister's door is always open, so we're told. So we're told. Okay. And any questions, Kendra, that we wanting to just pick up from?
No, nothing's come in yet.
Okay. Well, I think probably it just remains for us then to thank Robbie so very much for your time today. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure everyone will have enjoyed that as much as I have enjoyed talking to you. I think it just probably remains for us to tell you about our next podcast for everyone to, if they can keep the date free for that. So Thursday, the 26th of May, the usual time, and we'll be delighted to be joined by William Black, the Deputy Director of Onshore Electricity Policy, Strategic Coordination and Energy Consents at the Scottish Government, who will be, I think, known to many of you. So you will have the opportunity to give feedback on today's event if you would like to fill in the form, which I think you will receive following today. And as I say, we will, if there are any comments left with us, we'll try to get back in touch with people, or if there's anything for Robbie, we'll certainly pass that on to him. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and thanks again to Robbie for all your time. It's been really good to chat to you, and I think everyone will be rushing to your website to look at some of these new initiatives that are coming out and announcements that will be due out next week. So thanks again.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Kendra. Thanks for having me.
Bye.